social ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View.
Number can't be right. Somebody typed it wrong. No, I guess they didn't. It turns out. And so we've got all sorts of facts and figures that somebody mistyped here. But nevertheless, we'll get into some of the jobs figures. Have lots of religious liberty issues. We're going to talk about Coach Kennedy. We're going to talk about Casey Griffin. And so just a lot to cover today. So first of all, Jeremy, thank you for being with us here on Point of View.
Good to be back. Thanks.
And again, I might just mention that many of you, of course, have a chance to hear him at the quarter to the hour every hour. So again, that is part of that First Liberty briefing, and so we enjoy that. And Kelly, back from Washington, D.C. Just incredible. We were hearing about that and watching you on with Shannon Bream on Fox News after your meeting up there on Monday. Tell us more.
It's really what happened this week is historic. And I don't know, it's kind of a great, I think, example of how what's important to the secular media is different from what's important to those in the body of Christ. Because, they did a little blip on it, a couple of stories here and there, and then it disappeared. But, I just want people to realize what happened. We have a president who ran on the issue of religious liberty. I can't remember any president who's run on that issue. He got into office. What did he do? He passed an executive order on religious liberty. What did he say in the executive order? One of the things he said is, I'm directing the Attorney General to issue guidelines on religious freedom for all of our federal government, for all of our departments, our agencies. So what did the Attorney General do? He issued these really incredible guidelines. That was in October. The strongest I've seen from any sort of government entity on that. And but just because you have the guidelines and just because you send them doesn't mean that everybody's following them. Mm-hmm. And so what happened this week on Monday is something that I never thought I would see happen in my lifetime, and that is they took the top people in different areas at the Department of Justice, the top lawyers, and said, we're going to form a team. It's going to be a task force on religious liberty. They're going to make sure that these are being followed and implemented in all of our agencies and departments throughout the federal government, and they're going to be a resource. They're going to be, you can call. And these weren't lower level people. Mm-hmm. These were the top legal minds in the government, in the lawyers area of the government, that are now sort of have this duty. And again, it's unbelievable what they've done, and it's a real encouragement for anybody who cares about religious freedom.
Jeremy, any comments? Because, again, you deal with this every day as well.
Yeah, no, it was good to be there and to see it all in person. And Kelly's exactly right. This is the first time in my memory, and I think in the nation's history, that we've had an attorney general hold a summit on religious liberty in the literal Department of Justice. Literally inside the building there. And, the reporting after was just simply unfair in many respects. A lot of them pointed to things that just didn't happen while it was there. Kelly and I were both in the front row, and I can tell you from witnessing it, you had the Attorney General talk about religious liberty and how important it is for all Americans. Mm-hmm. After that, he sat down, and there were a number of presenters there. You had a Catholic bishop was there, a Jewish rabbi, a gentleman from the Sikh faith. There was a Muslim attorney there talking about the issues particular to her faith. There was all kinds of, just a cross-section of America represented on that panel, and on a variety of different panels, talking about the different levels of importance for religious liberty, everything from land use to, Jack Phillips was there talking about his case one more time. So, again, how important it was to remind America that this is a precious right, that it is indeed under attack, not just to one faith, but to all of them, and that people of faith in general need to be reminded that their government, through the Attorney General and by the President, as Kelly pointed out, are committed to defending the First Amendment and the laws that Congress has passed.
I might just mention, as you go to our website, we've got some information. First of all, under Kelly's picture, we have it's Christmas in July, even if it is in August. And we have also under Jeremy's First Liberty Briefing, so you can follow some of the things we've been talking about here today. But I thought one of the other things would be kind of interesting. We've posted this piece about college football coaching legend Bobby Bowden to the U.S. Supreme Court. Let Coach Kennedy pray. Tell us about that one.
Well, we filed our case in the Supreme Court here recently, and just this week, a number of other groups are now coming in and filing briefs and saying, we support Coach Kennedy. This is a case that the Supreme Court needs to take. And, of course, Bobby Bowden is a great name to be on the brief, but we had a number of others, too. It's really, I think the country is really behind this. I hope this is enough to encourage the court that they really do need to take this case. This affects the entire country in dramatic ways, and so this is a good sign, good first step.
And, Jeremy, I was just noticing, we're not just talking about Bobby Bowden, but the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, 12 state attorney generals, the Texas High School Coaches Association, 15 members of Congress. I mean, it's always hard to get the Supreme Court to take cases. You have thousands and thousands of cases, and they take maybe 60, 70, 80. So, but this is, I think, building momentum for them to take the case about Coach Kennedy.
Look, I think the Supreme Court justices are just like you and I in many respects. They're human beings, first of all, and they know who Bobby Bowden is, and they watch college football like you and I do, or at least I suppose some of them will. I hope they do.
Yeah, let's hope some do.
And they know, if they may not know, look, there may be some of you that are listening going, Bobby who? Well, let me just remind you, Bobby Bowden is one of the winningest football coaches in college football history. If he's not in the Hall of Fame right now, he will be. Mm-hmm. And his legendary status as a football coach at the college level is remarkable. But what he's maybe surpassed for is not just his football coaching knowledge. He's certainly a better football coach maybe than Joe Kennedy. I don't think he'd mind me saying that, by the way. Yeah. But what Bobby Bowden has always been known for is his being a man of faith. And what his brief is pointing out is how very important it is to stand next to guys like Coach Kennedy. Mm-hmm. To say, look, you fought for my freedoms on the battlefield. I'm happy to stand beside you, or maybe we should say kneel beside you as you go to the Supreme Court of the United States and urge the court to recognize that this is going to be much more far-reaching than just Joe Kennedy and his little team. It's going to reach across the entire country into all levels of not only football, but all sports, and then beyond that, into the schools themselves with employees. And Coach Bowden is just simply saying, look, pay attention to that. That's why you see the BGEA, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, saying, look, this is a very important matter for people around the country. The 12 state attorneys general saying, look, in our states, this is vital. The lead attorney general on that was from Arizona to help get that thing moving forward. And then members of Congress, led by Senator Cornyn, right here in Texas, saying, look, this is an important matter for our state. That's why the Texas High School Coaches Association also put in to say, yeah, this is affecting us down here in Texas too. So, hey, you know what, court? You don't have to take this case, but we really, really, really think you should.
I would think so. You know, there are lots of reasons, probably hundreds of reasons why to make sure that we confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. But one more is he would know who Bobby Bowden is, because I was just reading the other day he played football. He said he never did debate, but he did football. And that's sort of the same thing, which shows, again, his sense of humor. We come back, though. We want to talk about another case. Those of you in the military really want to pay attention. This has to do with Casey Griffin, and we'll get into that. And we are just privileged today to have both Kelly Shackelford and Jeremy Dice, and they're with First Liberty. We have links on the website, and we'll come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Perhaps you have heard of the latest environmental movement to ban plastic straws. Even though they're small, they are large in number. The activists claim that there are millions of straws used every day. That number seems high, at least to me, since I avoid using plastic straws. I figure I don't need a straw when I drink water or beverage at home. Why do I need one in a restaurant? And if I go to a Starbucks, I have a personal cup with a straw that I rinse out when I'm done. As Christians, we should practice sound stewardship of the environment, but I also think we need to think carefully about the impact of a plastic straw ban. On the one hand, all these straws end up as litter in landfills and in the ocean. On the other hand, there are some people, those with disabilities and small children, for example, that actually need a straw to drink. At the moment, the biggest plastic pollution challenge is in our oceans, and plastic straws aren't the problem. Large plastic floating islands in the ocean are a major environmental issue. Perhaps the best known is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that floats between California and Japan. The nonprofit Ocean Cleanup has discovered that the Pacific Patch is much larger than originally estimated. But plastic straws and plastic bags aren't the reason. Nearly half of it was fishing nets. When combined with ropes and line, it accounted for a majority of the trash. The rest included hard plastics like crates and bottle caps, and when Ocean Cleanup looked at food packaging, they found that nearly a third was written in Japanese and nearly a third was written in Chinese. None of this is to argue against the reducing of our use of plastic straws, but it does remind us that if we want to address the problem of plastic pollution, we should focus more attention on things other than plastic straws. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
By the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we also broadcast on Facebook Live, and I'll be checking a little bit later to see if you've left any comments there and read those. If you have comments, questions, or other observations, we'd love to hear from you. It is our weekend edition. Kelly Shackelford, Jeremy Dice, and we, for a few minutes, want to focus on the military. How many times, Jeremy, when we talk about the military, we talk about the chaplains? In this case, it's, I guess, an assistant chaplain, Casey Griffin. But tell us the story, because this is another very good reason why people should support what you're doing at First Liberty.
Well, I think so, and it dovetails well with what we were talking about before the break on the Religious Liberty Summit, because like Kelly pointed out, that the Attorney General put out these guidelines back in October to all the heads of the departments there in the cabinet. But it seems like Secretary Mattis has not received the memo because we keep on having, and really an uptick in religious liberty matters within the armed forces. And this is a stunning issue in front of us here. So Casey Griffin is a staff sergeant. She's an assistant to the chaplain. She basically takes in information, provides it to the chaplain, helps schedule things, and that sort of thing. Very administrative role. She's a very up and coming. In fact, she's had several generals and other leaders recommend her to something called Green to Gold, which is an ROTC program for enlisted members of the armed forces. So they get to go to college on a full ride, basically, and they come out as an officer. So she's got the trust of several very high-ranking individuals, including a couple generals, like I said. Well, anyway, she was approached by a same-sex couple to attend this Strong Bonds marriage retreat that the Army puts on. And she took that information, said thank you, and said she gave that information to the chaplain and then reported back to the couple, hey, look, the chaplain's probably going to want to talk to you. That's all she did. She took in the information, she handed it to the chaplain, and she handed it back. The chaplain might talk to you. That's the extent of Casey's involvement in this case. Well, that wasn't enough for the investigators in the Army there. They investigated her and determined that she needs to be found guilty of discrimination, that she had, in fact, caused emotional harm to the other side by failing to respond in a timely manner to this couple. It took a couple days for the chaplain to actually reconnect with the couple. And for that, they've recommended that she be found guilty of discrimination. And so the Army we put them on notice about this and said, this is a problem. This is a real problem. You guys should take care of this. Well, General Sontag is the general that oversees that base there in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The investigation recommended her charge of discrimination. The colonel that is her immediate supervisor, and I realize it's getting a little complicated, but stay with me here. The colonel cleared her and said there has been no discrimination, no violation of the Army's EO policy, equal opportunity policy. Casey's perfectly fine, no problem. The couple appeals that to the general. So General Sontag now is sitting on this. Now keep in mind, this is a general, a 2-star general, whose job it is to order men and women into combat, probably for life and death reasons, right? I mean, he's got to make snap decisions, big, monumental, literal life or death decisions in his command, and he has intentionally not made a decision on this matter for 4 months now. So his intentional indecision here, his refusal, he just doesn't want to make this decision because he's caught between doing the right thing and doing the politically popular thing. Yeah. So he's caught, and he knows that, and he doesn't want to make that decision. And so just this past week, we got the information back that he was not going to make a decision, which puts a flag on her file. Of course. And as she's applied for this Green to Gold program, which is an extremely prestigious thing for staff sergeants to receive, this is a very difficult program to get into for a staff sergeant. Mm-hmm. And yet she had all these letters of recommendation from 3-star generals, from colonels, from chaplains, everybody speaking huge things about her. And so because that flag is on there, we asked him to remove that flag, and he refused. And so effectively, Casey Griffin, who's an African-American, up-and-coming enlisted officer, or enlisted staff sergeant, that could become an officer if he would just simply remove this flag. Right. He's refused to do so, and more or less ended her chance at going to college on a full ride and then coming out as an officer. I mean, it is absolutely despicable, and I think that that Congress, the Department of Defense, the President, whoever else needs to hold General Sontag accountable.
Well, again, those are the kinds of stories that you find out about when you go to First Liberty. And under both of your pictures, we have that. And, of course, in just a minute, we'll talk about the fact that there's a Coach Kennedy T-shirt and a few other things. But whether you want to know about Brett Kavanaugh, whether you want to know about Marianne Sauce, whether you want to know about Casey Griffin, or any individual that is being defended right now by First Liberty, you can go to firstliberty.org, and there's a lot there.
There is. I would encourage you. We didn't mention, but they can get a shirt and support Coach Kennedy. It has an image of him kneeling, and you can join sort of the kneel at the 50 team, really. And so I'd encourage people to do that. I think this is something that, football's coming up here pretty soon. People would ask, hey, what's that? What's that shirt about, right?
Yeah, guy kneeling. And, of course, they might get the wrong impression, so that you really have a great conversation started there, too, don't you?
It is.
But first down.
I want to circle back to this, the chaplain case, because this is really, really outrageous. People need to understand what we're saying here. Let's go to the main case. Chaplain Squires.
Yes.
Who's a guy.
I was hoping you bring that up.
He's been awarded the Bronze Star. He's been given the Meritorious Service Award 5 times. I mean, this is a guy that's really served our country. And the way it works in the Army, what the regulations say is your endorsing group, your denomination, you are required to, as a chaplain, to follow the beliefs of your denomination. What are the beliefs of his denomination? Well, it's Southern Baptist, so they believe that marriage is a man and a woman, and therefore he can't counsel or marry a same-sex couple. Army understands that. They want you to follow the beliefs of your denomination. What happens if 2 women or 2 men say, hey, I'd like you to, do our marriage counseling or whatever? They say you're supposed to refer them to another chaplain who does not have. You just say, I'm sorry, under my beliefs, I'm not allowed to do that, but I'm happy to refer you. That's exactly what Chaplain Squires did. And for that, his career is now being destroyed. And it said, well, you're discriminatory. Because I followed Army regulations? Yes. Now that's discrimination. For, as Franklin Graham said, a chaplain can't even follow their faith. Yeah. So that's the underlying case. Okay, that's outrageous enough, what they're doing. But now his assistant, okay, who is a person who all she did is the lesbian couple came to his assistant. She said, oh, sure, let me check with the chaplain. That's all she did. That is now discrimination. We're taking your college away. We're ruining your career. I mean, outrageous isn't even enough for that. I mean, this is really, this General Sontag needs to be gone.
Yeah.
I mean, this is outrageous. I don't want anybody in the military that acts like this, that would do something like this to people, especially somebody. I mean, I'm thinking of Squires and his Bronze Star and all of his awards, but even to her, his assistant, this is so over the line. You know, I keep thinking of. I think of Donald Trump when he was back on TV. I want to see Donald Trump say, "You're fired" to Sontag. I mean, I do not want people like this in the military, and he's the commander in chief. So this is something I think everybody should know. By the way, on our website, there's a way you can support.
Right. I was going to
you can sign a petition, and
right. It's on the right-hand side.
I really encourage everybody, get this, share it with other people. People need to know about this. And support Chaplain Squires, because what he's going through is really ridiculous.
One irony about that, I'd love to get your comments, Jeremy, is when I look at some of the people that you are defending that are now accused of discrimination, they're African American. You can talk about Eric Walsh, you can talk about Casey Griffin, you can talk about a number of individuals. And we know what discrimination was in the 1960s, but it's been so redefined here because of political correctness, hasn't it?
Well, it sure has. And look, this is something that should not happen. There's no explanation for this aside from what must be a clear anti-religious bias by General Sontag, and that has no business at the highest levels of our United States Armed Forces, especially a gentleman who's supposed to be making life and death decisions for people. He can't make this simple decision for an assistant. To put this in the civilian context, we all are familiar with the Baker cases, Jack Phillips and others. This would be like if an assistant to Jack Phillips, whose job it is to run the cash register, took the information, handed it to Jack, and handed it back, and that person being denied advancement, being found guilty of discrimination and that sort of thing, they simply caused a train. That's it. That's all they did. They took information and handed it back. That is the extent of the involvement. And for this up-and-coming African-American staff sergeant who had the chance to go on to a full-ride scholarship in college, think of what that must have been like to lose that. And then the chance of becoming a commissioned officer and losing that.
Yes.
I mean, that's just remarkable that this level of bigotry by a general in the armed forces would prevent someone from being able to move forward like that.
Yeah, you get kids that are valedictorians and told that they can't give their full speech, and all these stories that we've heard so many times over the years of First Liberty. So if you would like to know a little bit more, firstliberty.org is on our website, where you can go there directly. And as Kelly mentioned, there's a sign the petition. One of those has to do with the World War I Veterans Memorial. Maybe we'll get an update on that, too. But we need to take a break. And if you'd like to join us or like to leave a comment, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we're also available on pointofview.net and on Facebook. We'll be right back.
Imagine a police officer telling you you can't pray in your own home. That happened not too long ago to Mary Ann Souse in Kansas. And in 2017, the U.S. 10th Circuit Court of Appeals sided with the officer. But this year, thanks to an investment of $1, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned that ruling. Okay, let me explain. Over the years, listeners to Point of View have made a big difference. Some have become congressmen. Others have saved lives through helping women in crisis pregnancies. Others have become constitutional attorneys, like Kelly Shackelford, who represented Mary Ann Souse. We recently discovered it costs about $1 to reach a Point of View listener on the radio and online for an entire year. You can't buy much for $1 these days, but you can transform the nation. Call today and invest in Point of View at 1-800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net, because $1 really can go a long, long way. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today. It is Weekend Edition, and Kelly Shackelford, Jerry made ice with us. And one of the themes that's run through the last couple of weeks is the need for you to have discernment and to be wise as a media consumer. And even today, I mentioned at the outset, but let me mention it again, 155 million people employed in July, almost 156 million, or the other way to look at it is 157,000 new jobs created in July, which is now the 11th month in which you've had a record-breaking situation. Now, we've always talked about some of the other factors, lowest unemployment for African Americans ever, lowest unemployment for Asian Americans, lowest unemployment for Latin Americans or Hispanics and others. And we've talked about all the economic data. But Jim Garrity reminds us of some other things. What about crime rates? Oh, they're down, way down since the 1990s. Drunk driving rates have hit a new all-time low last few years. Teen pregnancy steadily declining. Abortion rate lowest since Roe versus Wade was passed. Infant mortality rate is low and getting even lower. High school graduation rates, highest level ever. And teen drug use, with the exception of marijuana, very few teenagers actually are part of the opioid abuse epidemic. The number of individuals with a 4-year college degree, highest level ever measured by the U.S. Census Bureau, and on and on and on. So there's a lot of positive news. So I go to CNN.com just a minute ago. The lead story is the conflict between President Trump and his administration over Russia. You wouldn't know anything positive is happening. And I thought, since the two of you were at a meeting on Monday, and then I read about it, I was wondering, were they even there? The press has not done a very good job of covering some of these stories.
No, when I was on with Shannon Bream on Fox Monday night, she quoted, well, the Daily Beast says, and she quoted these things. They say that this means that everybody's going to die. It's just the most outrageous stuff you've ever thought. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, I was at the meeting and none of this stuff was said at the meeting. This is just all made up. And I looked at the Daily Beast article, the entire article, there's not a single citation to anything. So they just kind of said, well, they're having a meeting, and this is what I think will probably happen at the meeting, although I'm not going to say it that way. I'm going to say this is what happened. And I'm just going to say the world's falling in, and I'm not going to have any proof or any evidence or any basis for that. And so it was just weird. That's how I started the TV appearances, asking about this attack. And I'm like, well, the attack is just being made up. It's just bizarre, because what happened, you could watch it. It was even streamed. It wasn't hard to watch. The Justice Department made it very open what they were doing, creating the Religious Liberty Task Force. You had people there talking from all different faiths about how this was good, what a great thing this is going to be, but you'd never known that from the media.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And don't forget what was there. To hear the reports were that the sky was falling, that Henny Penny was running around, sure that the world was going to end that day, and that there was all kinds of discrimination being unleashed under the guise of the law by the Attorney General.
Right.
There's not even close to what was there. The first presentation after Attorney General Sessions got done presenting was by a Jewish rabbi out of Boca Raton, Florida, who spent over a decade trying to be able to build a small place for he and his believers to meet to pray. And he got the runaround. He had to pay fines. He had to outlay a bunch of money for permits and that sort of thing. Think if that's your house of worship and you've got to go and try to move into a town to have a prayer meeting, and you've got to spend 5 figures in order to be able to have, just to be able to have the privilege to even move in. Meanwhile, you've got all kinds of other groups that are being able to meet in. And all. There's no other explanation except for the fact that they don't want Jewish people moving into their neighborhood. We've got a case up in Airmont, New York, the very same thing. One of our rabbis there who wants to meet together in his garage to have a prayer meeting. He spent over $20,000 just trying to have the privilege to meet in his garage, to meet whatever silly restrictions were put on him. in order to have that meeting, that prayer meeting, right there in his own home. And then he was rewarded with a ticket that could have put him in jail for up to a year. I mean, this is absolutely outrageous kind of behavior. And it's not just Jewish synagogues. We see this with mosques. We see this with churches. We got a case out in Walt Hill, Nebraska, Light of the World Gospel Ministries. Go to our website, read about this case, watch our video on it. I'll share it on Facebook. It's incredible. Here's a town of less than 750 people on top of inside of a Native American reservation. And you have a guy who's moved here from Northern Ireland to be the pastor of this church because he sensed such a call in his life to come and minister to the Omaha people there, because one of the women there called him, asked him, please, there's no one teaching my people. I need someone to come and talk to my people. And now he wants to revitalize the neighborhood, not just with a simple worship center, but with a laundromat so people can have a place to wash their clothes, a cafeteria so people can have food, a Goodwill store so people can have clothes on their back. This is a town that looks like a post-apocalyptic movie set. I mean, you've got a building that kind of blew up and no one's bothered to clean it up over 6 or 8 months now. The kids for the Sunday school class are meeting in what amounts to a shipping container for their Sunday school classes. Mm-hmm. And yet the village elders there say, no, you can't have it. They've given the permission, then ripped it back with no legal reason whatsoever. They've thrown people out of town meetings that want to talk on this topic. They've shut them down over and over again. They would rather have graffiti and buildings falling in on themselves. One of the buildings that they own and they can't remodel or tear down has a tree growing out of the roof. And I mean, not like a little, it's a 10-foot tree growing out of the roof. It's ready to cause someone a significant amount of harm. And the church says, just let us remodel or rebuild. We want to do good things for this neighborhood. The elders saying, no. Meanwhile, the city buildings look great. The local casino, just right across the street from the church, perfect condition. It's silly how obvious the religious discrimination is there. These are the kinds of things happening all over the country on a daily basis and was the subject of most of the conversation at this event on Monday. And yet the media, who could have learned a great deal from the heartland of America, just simply pushed them aside to be able to move forward with their own personal agenda.
You know, the other day I was quoting from Judge Jim Ho. Of course, you guys know who he is only so well because Kelly's put me on to him, and I did another commentary, which will come out next week on it. But he was talking about, in this case, the Second Amendment is seen as sort of a second-class right. Mm-hmm. But I thought, in some respects, the whole issue of religious liberty, Kelly, is seen sort of as a second-class right, that whenever there's anything else that can contradict with religious liberty, whether it's LGBT, whether it's the city fathers, whether it's a local zoning ordinance, in almost every case you see in this secular world that many times they treat religious liberty as a second-class right. What's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, that's why First Liberty Institute exists, is because that is not what the Constitution says. That is not what the federal law says. And they may think that, but they're going to find out that the hammer in this country is religious freedom in the Constitution. And so they can't do that. They can't treat it as a second class. But this is the terminology. I mean, if you look at the LGBT movement, their sort of little moniker is that religion shouldn't be a license to discriminate.
Right. Yeah,
okay?
I've seen that so often.
And
I always posted something about that,
that's
too.
their way to try to say religious freedom shouldn't be there. And it's just bizarre. I mean, look, whatever the issue on LGBT, there are different beliefs. And I think that the vast, vast, vast majority of Americans believe that people should be allowed to have different beliefs. But that's not what they believe. They think you're not allowed to have a different belief. You can't have those religious beliefs. We're not going to allow that. That's a license to discriminate for you to hold those different beliefs. No, that's why we founded this country, so people could have different beliefs. If you don't like what they believe, you don't have to go where they are. But please leave them alone. I mean, that's what Americans kind of believe, is leave me alone. Let me come as a Quaker or as a Baptist or, a non-congregationalist from the Church of England. That's why I came to the United States, so I can live in peace and have my own beliefs. And that's what this is trying to attack. They're saying, no, your religion's no excuse. Religious freedom is actually in the Constitution versus these other issues they keep bringing up that are nowhere in the Constitution.
I talked to a reporter a day or two after the event, and the first question was, are you guys seeing an uptick on these denial of service cases like Jack Phillips? I said, no.
No.
I mean, yeah, they're out there, I guess, but I'm thinking of Sam Blackledge, who was told he couldn't use the word, he couldn't reference his faith during his high school valedictory address. I mean, this is a settled issue in the law, very clear-cut issue. We're still fighting that issue today in 2018. It's been settled for a decade or more, 2 decades now. We've got cases like Chaplain Squires we talked about a minute ago. We've got cases all over the country involving Light of the World Gospel Ministries, religious land use cases, all kinds of cases of those popping up. We've got Jewish groups out in California, like Chabad of Irvine, that wants to have their religious ceremony with chicken. I mean, there's all kinds of things, but for some reason, that's not being paid attention to whatsoever.
Well, we are. That's why we're doing this today on Point of View. We'll come back with some more comments right after this.
The birth rate in the U.S. has hit an all-time low. Replacement-level fertility requires an average of 2.1 children per woman. Ours is roughly 1.76. Fewer women are having children, and the ones who do are having fewer of them. A Pew Research survey done in June reveals that Americans like the idea of larger families. According to the study, 41% of U.S. adults think that families of 3 or more children is ideal, but millennials are just not going there. Melissa Langsam-Bronstein writes for The Federalist. Lately, she's been tackling issues surrounding millennials and marriage. Her analysis of the trends leads her to conclude that millennials will either have fewer children than they'd wanted or opt out of parenthood altogether. Ms. Bronstein encourages millennials to take a leap of faith and have babies despite their worries. She writes, "The world has never been problem-free, and sometimes we need to act in spite of that." Millennials are very concerned about the high cost of childcare. Melissa Bronstein points out that the first 5 years are the most costly in this category. She suggests soliciting help from family members, adjusting work schedules, and trading off childcare with other parents. I'd add figuring out ways for moms to work part-time from home. Lots of millennials say they aren't having kids because they can't afford a house. But, writes Ms. Bronstein, babies can live in apartments. Besides, you won't regret the sacrifices you make to be a parent. One study of millennials shows 36% of respondents choosing to forego having kids because they want leisure time, 18% saying career is a greater priority, and 14% saying they work too much to have children. Melissa Bronstein urges her generation to rethink these priorities. As millennials age, these concerns will evaporate. They'll miss those kids, and so will society. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Kelly Shackelford, Jeremy Dice with us. And let me just mention for a minute, Jeremy, this is the time when we oftentimes hear your commentary. The one today is America's unwavering promise to religious freedom, no matter the landscape. The other day you had one on the firefighter discriminated against having long hair and hosting religious clubs in a school, which that one just had me rolling my eyes. Oh my goodness, we can't possibly walk past there and have a good news club mention Jesus or something. So each day you have the briefing. And if people don't have a chance to hear it, they can go to the website, and you have an opportunity for them to read or to hear some of the material that you've put together every day.
Yeah, of course, they can go to firstliberty.org and sign up for the briefing there, or listen to it right there online. But you probably have an iPhone in your pocket or a cell phone of some sort that has a podcast capacity on it. Go to the podcast store or whatever it is on your phone that has your way to get podcasts, and just search the First Liberty Briefing. Sign up for it. It's very kind of you to say nice words about it, Kirby. I appreciate that. It's 90 seconds. We're telling the story of religious liberty. I try to do it in a somewhat kind of whimsical manner at times if I can. I'm trying to make the law, which is sometimes a little bit dry, a little bit more interesting, and give you a little bit of surprise at the end of each one of those episodes as to what the law actually is, so you can employ that in your day-to-day life.
I love it because I get to hear it 3 times, at 12:45, 1:45, and 2:45.
Well, for others, it takes a little bit longer for them to learn things, so I'm glad that you're paying attention,
just finally,
Kirby.
I think by the 3rd hour, I think I can give it almost. And again, there are some incredibly kind of obscure stories that I've never heard before. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. But just before we run out of time, again, that's on the link to firstliberty.org. But there's another one that says Supreme Court petition is last hope for Bladensburg. We were talking about, we hope that this is not the last hope for Coach Kennedy, but it really is the last hope for that particular case. Talk about that.
It really is, because if the court doesn't take that case, think of what happens next. The monument either has to have its arms cut off. This is a Celtic cross style in the shape of a gravestone reminiscent of the gravestones of the battlefield in Europe. This gravestone of 49 men who were killed in battle in Europe, erected by their mothers and the American Legion. The next step after that, if the court declines this case, is to tear down that monument or remove its horizontal arms. It is then to go across the river to Arlington National Cemetery and knock down the Argonne Peace Cross, the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice, and somehow figure out a way around the guards of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier so that they can sandblast the side of that one where it says, "Here lies a soldier known but to God." I actually would like to watch to see how that would go off, if those guys would actually permit that or not. I doubt it.
I doubt it.
And then that bulldozer keeps on going right over the graves of Teddy and Bobby Kennedy, which are also buried in Arlington under a cross-shaped grave marker, and all the way across the country, demolishing any religious artifacts that are on public property and publicly or displaying things like that all across the country. That cannot be the case. We cannot allow that to happen. But I want people listening to imagine a country where we have people die, we put up a gravestone or a remembrance of their sacrifice, and somebody becomes quickly offended by this thing and demands that it be taken down just because it has a religious image on public property. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever if you look at the rest of our history and heritage.
Yes. Kelly, when the few times I've spoken on this, I almost always have somebody saying, now, wasn't there a case before the Supreme Court out in the desert or something? I said, well, yeah, it's by the same organization, First Liberty, and they won there. But then when they go to the Fourth Circuit Court, they don't necessarily seem to be bound by that precedent. And they say, no, that can't possibly be the case. Explain that, if you might.
Well, it's hard to explain. I mean, basically, what they're doing is the Salazar case, which is the one you're referring to, the Mojave Desert cross case. That case went all the way to the Supreme Court, but it was kind of indirect. What happened there is you had a wonderful man come forward and say, look, I've been caretaking for this memorial, since 1934, really. And he said, I want, rather than have it torn down, which is what the ruling was going to do, I'm going to give 5 acres of my land here in the desert for 1 acre around this memorial, and I'll take care of it. And everybody thought, well, hey, that's a great offer. So that's what happened. Federal government said, yeah, here, we'll take 5 acres of land. We'll give you the 1 acre with this on it. And that's what the ACLU said. Oh, no, that's unconstitutional. You're just doing this to save the cross. You're being, pro-religious. Like, this is a veterans memorial. It was put up by the hands of people who weren't even religious. They just wanted to remember those who had died. So they're saying that since that wasn't directly on, a monument, it was a land transfer, that therefore that doesn't really apply in this case. And the Fourth Circuit, which is now very liberal, Obama appointed a lot of judges on that court, and it's a pretty outrageous decision. I mean, it was so outrageous that the Clinton-appointed judge dissented in the original 2-1 decision. Mm-hmm. And then when they issued the final decision, really we asked for them to take cert. a number of dissents were written saying you cannot allow this to happen. I mean, this is going to require going into Arlington and tearing down, veterans memorials and crosses. That's why many people think the Supreme Court is going to take it, but we just don't know. And so when they if they'll go and sign the petition, that gets more activity, more focus. If more people are heard, the better chance that the court realizes, oh, wow, we've got to pay attention to this case, and this is something we can't allow to happen.
And as they sign up, don't they also get then some of the updates, the prayer requests, and, of course, these incredible press releases, which I'm getting quite regularly now because it just seems like you can't even keep track of all the cases you guys are dealing with right now.
It's definitely, look, I mean, the Attorney General himself this week in his opening speech for the new Religious Liberty Task Force started off by saying that there is a serious level of attacks going on right now on religious freedom. And that's one of the reasons why they knew they needed to be dedicated in doing this Religious Liberty Task Force. So we're definitely seeing that at First Liberty.
Well, Jeremy, again, if people wanted to know more about the First Liberty Briefing, that's on the website. They can sign the petition, a number of other things, because that one other issue I thought I'd bring up real quickly, and we'll get more into this in the next hour. You have some resource documents there, because it's just about time to go back to school. You got some boys, and you're starting to think, oh, it's August, it's school time. And that's when some of these issues surface, don't they? There's getting together with the football team, and somebody mentions Jesus or a verse or something like that. And again, we've got the People for the Separation of Church and State or Freedom from Religion Foundation or ACLU, or somebody gets upset. So you've got some resources there, don't you?
Yeah, we want people to be fully equipped when they go back to school. And that means moms and dads need to print out these documents, have it in the Trapper Keeper or the kid when they go back to school, or put it on the refrigerator. Read through it as a family so that they know when they're talking to their colleagues about their faith or their VBS experience this summer or their class assignment that touches upon their faith, they know what they can and can't do or what they can and should do. And if they have any problems, they know how to be able to triage the problem as a mom and dad, and then call us to help out to figure out how we might be able to help them out on a variety of things. So go to firstliberty.org and download those things. While you're there, listen to the briefing. We've got a couple kind of quick hits on things like that, but we also have commentary that our attorneys have written. Kelly wrote one earlier this week that appeared, I think, the Daily Signal on Monday. Just good information for you to be able to be reading, see our analysis that we've got going on so that you are better informed. And you can share it with your friends on Facebook so that they know more about it.
And again, I posted one of Michael Berry's pieces last week, and we'll post yours then. I may have missed that, and we'll do our best to cover that. And I would encourage some of you, I think we had the link earlier in the week. We have a link, and you can probably find it in a number of places, the interview that Shannon Bream did with you. It doesn't take long to watch the video. And I think, if nothing else, it's a good antidote to some of the news coverage. So I would encourage you, if you're watching that, to then click that share button, put it on your Facebook page, start a conversation, and I think that'll be something be worthwhile. When we come back, though, I want to talk about the jobs report. I want to talk about whether or not there's a blue wave coming and a variety of other issues. We also yesterday talked about freedom of conscience. Michael Brown's written about that. And, of course, David French, we quoted him yesterday. So we have a lot to cover, and we will do so right after these important messages.
Just over 100 years ago, 2 or 3 cents would buy you what it takes $1 to buy today. What of any real value can you buy for $1? Well, how about this? How about enabling one listener to hear point of view not just today, but for an entire year? You heard right. $1 makes it possible to reach a person through the radio or through any of our online channels for a year, and pays for all the other resources available through our website. All the interviews with special guests and public officials, all the information, all the training, all the inspiration and transformation for $1. How many dollars will you invest in the future of our nation? How many lives can you change with your investment today? Call right now and reach more people to help change our nation. 1-800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net, because $1 really can go a long, long way. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition. We are privileged to have in studio with us today Kelly Shackelford and Jeremy Dice. And we've got some new economics, and that these economic reports say, for example, 155 million people, almost 156 million people employed in July. And this is now the 11th record-breaking month in which 157,000 jobs created in July. So we have some things to talk about that. What about a blue wave coming? And we're going to get into a little bit later some of these issues of religious liberty. But first things first, today is my anniversary, so I didn't want to forget that. So my wife has been married to me for 44 years and put up with that. And they've said behind every successful man is a good woman and a surprise mother-in-law. And my joke is that that's the one time when it's not true, because my wife wasn't as interested in me originally, but it's when my mother-in-law said, this guy's really somebody you should pay attention to. And that was about 45 years ago, and we've been married for 44 years. So anyway.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and again, finding somebody who's been married for 44 years, especially 50 years, not many of those anymore. So that's something to be said. And, of course, I got two married men across the table from me as well, so they can speak to that issue. But, Kelly, let's start off with the economic news for just a minute. You would not know this if you turned on the mainstream press. The lead story I saw just a minute ago in CNN was the conflict, in quotes, between the president and his administration about Russia. And you wouldn't know that we have, again, set another economics record. You wouldn't know that we have the lowest unemployment for African Americans in history, lowest unemployment for Hispanic Americans, lowest unemployment for Asian Americans, record job growth, and all sorts of other things taking place. And even recently, I saw all the other statistics on crime rates down, drunk driving rates at an all-time low, abortion rate lower than ever it's been since Roe versus Wade, high school graduations highest than ever. These are all good news, you know, not to mention all these federal judges that have been put on the court, which relates to your topics. There's a lot of things to talk about, and yet the mainstream press just has not done a very good job of covering these.
No, I mean, the press is so out of whack right now. I mean, they really are an embarrassment to the name journalism. It used to be that journalists had a lot of pride in being objective and trying to be balanced. I mean, everybody has a little bit of bias one direction or the other, but people tried to be fair, to present both sides. Right now, it's just unhinged. I mean, the things going on. There's this visceral hatred for the president in most of the press that doesn't allow them to cover the things that are really relevant to people. I mean, most Americans, if you ask them, there's been some polls on this, said, I don't want to hear about Russia. Okay, I'm tired of it. It doesn't relate to my life. Why don't we talk about whether I have a job? Why don't we talk about the things that I care about? And the media is just ignoring it because they're on such a unhinged, deranged sort of obsession with the president. There are a lot of great things. The jobs, of course, is great. You've got a record number of jobs. Of course, we had the 4.1. I mean, if you'll remember, it was right at 1 GDP for basically 8 years under Obama. And to hit 4, I mean, no, I don't think people said they didn't think it was possible to ever hit 3 again.
Right.
And 4, and there are people thinking we might hit 5. So you look at that, you look at what happened, I mean, especially for point of view listeners, what happened this week on religious liberty, just tremendously good news, which I know we'll probably talk about a little later. It really is sad that we can't focus. Now, here's the good news. Despite the fact that the media is completely out of touch, the people still are getting the message. For instance, I mean, you would think the president would be at a 10% approval rating in light of all these articles. Instead, he's over 50%.
Yeah.
And if you look at why, one of the reasons was Hispanic numbers were going towards, well, how can that be? He's for building a wall. Because, you know, number one, most Hispanics are like most every other American, and they like the fact that they have money in their pocket and that the jobs are increasing and that the GDP is at 4.1, that not only African American but Hispanic unemployment is the lowest ever in the history of the country. That's why. So the good news is people in the country are smart enough to even ignore the media and the silliness that they're engaging in, and I think there's a great market waiting for someone who wants to be a normal journalist and do really good journalistic work, because I think people are really hungry for it.
No, I absolutely agree. And as someone who works with the media a lot, I love to feed them good stories that tell a great history of our country, but also of really compelling Americans that are doing amazing things in this country. There's lots of stuff for us to be able to talk about. And I couldn't resonate more with your comment about people don't want to listen about Russia one more time. You know, it's just one more story about Russia with no resolution to it whatsoever. It's that there maybe could maybe down the future something that will happen with here, but right now we've not seen anything but Russia. Okay, well, come back to me when you've got something to report on, not argue about.
Yeah. And one of the articles we've posted here is the Twitter response to the Religious Liberty Task Force. And I'd love to get your comments. Again, we did a link that I think most people can find, but we can create it again, where you were on with Shannon Bream. And it's just amazing that both of you were at that Liberty Task Force, that Religious Liberty Task Force. You had a chance to hear the Attorney General. And yet you wouldn't, again, sense that looking at the Twitter response or even the way the mainstream press pretty much ignored it, that some really positive things happened this week.
Well, I mean, you know, I was actually talking the other day our staff, we were kind of sitting around, and as a group at First Liberty, that our whole focus is religious freedom. 2 years ago, I'd announced to our supporters at events and different things that we had analyzed, because we were really surprised by the Trump presidency, and we were analyzing how to advance religious freedom under Hillary Clinton.
Right.
And then all of a sudden we got thrown a curveball, right? It's Donald Trump president. And we're like, okay, we got to reanalyze what opportunities are there to advance religious freedom. And we started looking at all the judicial seats that were open, a lot of the stuff, and we saw just unbelievable opportunities. We were like, but we told everybody, but these are just opportunities. So I was sitting around yesterday and we were talking, and I was like, we're at a different phase now. It's not opportunities. These opportunities are happening. They're being realized. We are getting unbelievably solid people onto the courts. Just in the last 2 days, 7 more people onto the courts. 1 federal court of appeals, 6 lower court. And a number of these people we're getting on the court are believers. They're people who are solid in their faith. They're totally committed to the Constitution. They're brilliant. They're young. They're going to be in the court 30, 40 years from now, okay? And then look at what you're talking about here, the Attorney General of the United States. I mean, again, divorce yourself from what's happening now and just think back some other time if somebody had told you this. The Attorney General of the United States is holding a special summit on religious freedom in the Justice Department and announcing a huge new focus, a religious liberty task force, where the top lawyers in our government are going to ensure religious freedom throughout all of our federal agencies and government and how they approach our citizens. Historic.
Well, again, we will spend some more time a little bit later talking about that, but just wanted to give you a preview. And when we come back, we have a lot more to cover. We will do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Perhaps you've heard of the latest environmental movement to ban plastic straws. Even though they're small, they are large in number. The activists claim that there are millions of straws used every day. That number seems high, at least to me, since I avoid using plastic straws. I figure I don't need a straw when I drink water or beverage at home. Why do I need one in a restaurant? And if I go to a Starbucks, I have a personal cup with a straw that I rinse out when I'm done. As Christians, we should practice sound stewardship of the environment, but I also think we need to think carefully about the impact of a plastic straw ban. On the one hand, all these straws end up as litter in landfills and in the ocean. On the other hand, there are some people, those with disabilities and small children, for example, that actually need a straw to drink. At the moment, the biggest plastic pollution challenge is in our oceans, and plastic straws aren't the problem. Large plastic floating islands in the ocean are a major environmental issue. Perhaps the best known is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that floats between California and Japan. The nonprofit Ocean Cleanup has discovered that the Pacific Patch is much larger than originally estimated. But plastic straws and plastic bags aren't the reason. Nearly half of it was fishing nets. When combined with ropes and line, it accounted for a majority of the trash. The rest included hard plastics like crates and bottle caps. And when Ocean Cleanup looked at food packaging, they found that nearly a third was written in Japanese and nearly a third was written in Chinese. None of this is to argue against the reducing of our use of plastic straws, but it does remind us that if we want to address the problem of plastic pollution, we should focus more attention on things other than plastic straws. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we have in studio with us Kelly Shackelford and Jeremy Dyson. We have a link to First Liberty. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those religious liberty cases, but one of the articles we've posted here is on Trumponomics, but also some of the other things that have been posting as well as to whether or not there's a blue wave coming. Got an article that appeared in the New York Times, so you know it must be true. We ran out of words to describe how good the jobs numbers are by Neil Irwin. And so assuming for just a minute, Kelly, that sometimes when people feel good about the economy and they feel good about their elected representative, they tend to elect those individuals if they're incumbents, or if it's an open seat, sometimes they say, well, if the economy's going pretty well, maybe we don't need to change horses. Now, typically during a midterm, the party out of power tends to gain seats. Any thought of where this might go in terms of first the House and then the Senate?
This is really a confusing one to me. I mean, if I had to put money down, right, I would say that the House will move towards the Democrats will pick up seats in the House. I think they're going to have a hard time picking up anything in the Senate just because the numbers are so skewed. I think out of the 36 seats, 26 are Democrat incumbent seats to hold. So there's very little room for them to pick up and a lot of room for them to lose. So they could actually lose some seats in the Senate. But I don't know, because I kind of feel like I'm watching two tidal waves coming at each other.
Very true.
And I just don't know which one is going to win out, because I think normally if Trump had been like a normal president and what he'd accomplished, I think there would be a huge correction, as they would say, because the energy is so high on all these people who hate Trump. I mean, it's not just I don't like him, I'm out of power. It's like, I mean, it's they're calling it Trump derangement syndrome, right? It's so over the top that the energy level is higher. And that's usually what happens in the midterms.
Right.
It's not that everybody who turned out in the election is now different. It's that many people don't turn out.
Right.
Because it's a midterm. So who turns out? The people with the more energy. The people with the energy are the people out of power because they don't like being out of power, and so they turn out. That's the normal. If this was normal, I think there would be a huge sweep in numbers. There would be a blue wave. The problem is, on the other side, you have, I think, two things. Number one, you've got the accomplishments that, people are like, this president makes me uncomfortable, but golly, I like the fact that African American and Hispanic employment is the lowest in the history of the country. I like the fact that we hit a 4.1 GDP, that there's tax cuts, and we just seem to just be beginning. So, like, people are like, do I really want to change course on this? And number two, the thing I think we can't count on is the thing that happened in the election. The polls were all wrong.
Oh, boy.
All these people were tired of this stuff. They're not loud. They're not outspoken. They don't necessarily give their opinion when a pollster calls them because they're scared somebody's going to, key their car or something. So that could happen too. It could be that what we're seeing now, and even in the polls, are not totally accurate. And so I don't know what of those forces wins. You've got clear energy on the I hate Trump side to get people out to vote. Will those people who voted for Trump in the election show up in the midterms? And will the moderates, the independents, the people in the middle go, golly, I don't care about any of that other stuff. I'm watching the economy in the country, and I'm staying with this horse. Will that overcome it? Close.
Yeah, I don't suspect it's going to be a blue wave, though. I think it might become a blue ripple at best. And I think there is actually a lot of positioning by the media to want to make this a blue wave. They've got a vested interest in wanting to. I mean, they've shown themselves to have a vested interest right now in wanting to see the downfall of this president and his policies, more importantly. I think you hit on a good point, though, Kelly, about the polls. Nobody trusts the polls. They didn't trust them at the beginning with this president, and I think there's even more reluctance to do so now. So and that goes both ways, both in terms of people who say one thing but do another. I do think there's a lot of that right now. People don't really want to admit that they like the president. They kind of say it with a kind of I don't really like the guy, but look what he's doing. He's doing some incredible things. The policies are pretty good. And you get other people that are trying to suppress them in other directions as well. So I think the polls are not to be very easily trusted. But if you can read between some of the lines, the article you posted about the blue wave coming from the National Review, it makes a good point that his approval rating numbers are going back up. That he hasn't seen these types of numbers since just after the inauguration. That's saying something. For a midterm election, for the president to actually be going on an upward trend on his approval ratings. Again, take that with a large grain of salt, given the polling information we just said a second ago. But that trend upwards is interesting at this time of the year, at this time in a presidency.
Let's think about the worst case scenario for some of these appointments that you're talking about, that maybe the trade wars really explode, and some people say some of the dislocation happens in October, November, and people are really discouraged. You see some places where it looks like there'll be a Democratic pickup in Tennessee and some other things. What happens if no longer do the Republicans have a majority in light of these appointments? Because one of the things that you've talked about is these are great lifetime appointments of really good judicial nominees. What if all of a sudden it's Chuck Schumer as the Senate Majority Leader, and it's much more difficult at this point, as if it hasn't been difficult already, for President Trump and others to get some of these nominees through the confirmation
to me
process.
From my standpoint, that's what the election's really all about as far as what's really important. Again, if you were like, oh, what kind of deal you want to work? You can have the House, just let me keep the Senate kind of thing. Because if the Senate, that's what everybody should be focused on. If the Senate changes hands, right now, what legislation is really getting through?
That is so true.
It's
a do-nothing Congress.
Yeah, and it's the explanation. It's not, you can say, well, there's Republicans, they're not doing anything. Well, it's true, but there is a reason. And the reason is You can pass stuff out of the House, but then it goes to the Senate.
Hundreds of pieces of legislation, almost 600 pieces of legislation that went nowhere in the Senate.
The Senate has the filibuster or cloture, whatever you want to call it. And so you got to have 60 votes. Well, they're not 60 Republicans. There's 51 in the Senate. So that's why you can't get anything through. So what would be the change in the midterm if they lost the House? And from my opinion, not much. But there are things that can be done that you don't need the House and the Senate. You just need the Senate, and that's confirmations. And if you lose the Senate, you lose all the confirmations. You lose all the judicial appointments. If no more Supreme Court appointments, all that changes. That and it's 51-49 right now. Okay, and the 51 includes John McCain, who can't even really vote.
Right.
So the Senate is really what you're focused on, and that's why things like Tennessee possibly losing a seat is really a big deal. I mean, for that state, which is very Republican, to go from a Republican senator, even though it's Lamar Alexander, he's not exactly Mr. Conservative, a crazy person.
Bob Corker and those, yeah.
But for that seat to go from Republican to Democrat is a big deal. And so you've got the Manchin seat,
West Virginia.
Got the Heitkamp seat, you've got the Connolly seat. I think in 2 years, not now, but you'll have
McCaskill
Alabama,
Missouri,
McCaskill.
Yeah.
So that is the key thing about the election to me is what happens in the U.S. Senate and those Senate races, because that's going to have a large. I think if the Democrats take over, I think the judicial nominations are done.
And again, just to emphasize that, Brett Kavanaugh will replace Anthony Kennedy. When did Anthony Kennedy come into office? In 1987, isn't that right? And so a year later, Ronald Reagan left office, and he has been sitting in that seat ever since. And you start every once in a while, even until recently, we'd have somebody every once in a while say, who put that person in office? Jimmy Carter? Oh, my goodness, and still we have Reagan appointees and certainly Bush appointees and Clinton appointees and others that are still making decisions in the federal court, the appeals court, or in some cases the Supreme Court. So if you don't think that's important, you haven't been paying attention. So let's take a break. I'd love to get your thoughts. You've been watching some of the elections and some of the campaigns. You've seen, of course, the primary elections. Most of those are over now. You've seen some of the campaigns. What are your thoughts about a blue wave? That's one of those issues we want to talk about. And we come back, I also want to talk about the influence of socialism, because indeed you've had Bernie Sanders and Alexa Ocasio-Cortez and others out there. Not all Democrats are socialists by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly some of these socialist ideas have become part of some of these campaigns. And some of those thoughts, and even the whole question about how expensive a single-payer plan would be. I'm going to talk about that, and if you have some comments, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some phone calls and continue our conversation with Kelly Shackelford and Jeremy Dice right after this.
Imagine a police officer telling you you can't pray in your own home. That happened not too long ago to Mary Ann Souse in Kansas. And in 2017, the U.S. 10th Circuit Court of Appeals sided with the officer. But this year, thanks to an investment of $1, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned that ruling. Okay, let me explain. Over the years, listeners to Point of View have made a big difference. Some have become congressmen. Others have saved lives through helping women in crisis pregnancies. Others have become constitutional attorneys, like Kelly Shackelford, who represented Mary Ann Souse. We recently discovered it costs about $1 to reach a Point of View listener on the radio and online for an entire year. You can't buy much for $1 these days, but you can transform the nation. Call today and invest in Point of View at 1-800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net, because $1 really can go a long, long way. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. It is our weekend edition. Kelly Shackelford, Jeremy Dice with us. And if you would like to join us, we'd love to hear from you about what you think is happening in the election. And certainly we've been watching these campaigns. And Kelly, one of the things that I've noticed, and we talked about this earlier in the week, is what Charles Cook called an unserious face of an unserious movement, or Rich Lowry called it the battle over socialism is joined. And I just wanted to get your thoughts. You've certainly worked on campaigns, followed campaigns. At the time in which there is this sense in which maybe we need to move to the center, the argument always has been that in the primaries you sort of run to the corners and then eventually you race to the center. And we've seen this happen so many times. But it does seem to me that this time at least some Democratic candidates are saying, no, I need to double down. And so as a result, you've had, of course, Bernie Sanders and, of course, this new kind of leader, if you will, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, showing up at various venues, promoting basically kind of a socialist agenda. Now, I don't call them socialists. They call themselves that. Right. You know, that's fair to say that. And one of the things they've been pushing is this idea of single-payer plan or Medicare for all. Well, the Mercatus Center came out with an estimate that it would be worth, it would cost an additional, this is an additional $32.6 trillion with a T. You know, we have a national debt of $20 trillion to put that in perspective. And so some people, first of all, said, well, that's probably not accurate. The Urban Institute, which is hardly a right-wing think tank, came to the same conclusion a couple of years ago. So you're talking about something for which we have not enough money in the economy. So then the argument is not that, we'll maybe need to back it off and try again, but then you had Bernie Sanders, and these are at rallies for congressional candidates saying, well, the way we're going to solve this is we're going to require every doctor and every hospital to accept Medicare payments, which are 40% less than what you get in the private sector. And we would, if we have to, take over some of the hospitals. And they say this with a straight face, and I'm thinking this is a quick way to lose an election. True?
Well, I hope so. You know, I think tying into one of the things we already talked about today, the economy being on a record pace, 4.1 GDP, probably going to hit 5. Lowest unemployment for African Americans in the history of the country, lowest employment for Hispanic. I mean, low employment, period, unemployment. I mean, it's incredible. But the one thing that I saw when they announced this, I guess it was a week or so ago, was they said, you know, this is the first time millennials have seen this.
Seen a positive, a growing economy.
They get to see a boom and begin to understand the principles that caused that boom, which were free market principles, not socialism. When this is the result, I think everybody realizes, this is the result of pulling back on regulations, which had been out of control under the Obama. Again, well-intentioned people, oh, the government's going to do this and that. And what they do is these regulations pile on, and then all of a sudden, not only can you not do your business that's already going, but you can't start another business. So it just smothers the economy, and this is why it was 1 point GDP, 1 point GDP, 1 point GDP. You get a president who comes in and says, and what he's done at this point is for every new regulation, 22 are being deleted. And all of a sudden you have that. You have the tax reductions. You have the bringing all that money that was over shores, that you take those tax burdens away and they expatriate that money back into the United States, which they then invest in the businesses here. You start seeing all these free market principles and, you know, boom, look what starts to happen. Well, the millennials are watching this. Not that they're all catching on, but they're seeing it for the first time in their lives. And so I think we're going to see, I believe, a move away from this confusion in the millennials of socialism. But I think this election is going to give us sort of a first time, because people that not just are socialists, but are running as saying, I'm for socialism.
Right.
And that is therefore going to make it to where people aren't hiding or pretending or whatever. They're going to debate. We're going to talk about this. We're actually going to have to think about what really works. Now, some Democrats are like running for the doors. They're like, this is a mistake. Okay,
that is true.
So they're trying to distance themselves, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen in a number of these races. And I think the thing that I don't know is, are the Republican opponents going to be able?
That's a good question.
To actually carry their side of the debate. They're not used. These are new arguments. They're used to other arguments. They're not used to having to. They usually, if they say you're a socialist, the argument's over, right? Now it's like, yeah, I'm a socialist. What's wrong with that? And so, can they answer that question? Can they explain these principles? Can they actually have an exchange of ideas? This could be a great thing for the country if there's really good argumentation back and forth of the pros and cons of the different approaches. And I think this election is going to give us that opportunity.
I would never have guessed that we would be debating a $15 an hour minimum wage, a guaranteed income, free college tuition, a single-payer plan, but that's developing in a lot of these congressional and senatorial races, Jeremy.
Well, good luck with that. I mean, I went to McDonald's the other day, maybe an ill-advised idea to do in general, but went there to get some French fries for my son. And
it's Big Mac anniversary. Did you get one of the coins?
And so I walk in, and rather than going to the counter, I went to a touchscreen and ordered my meal. That $15 an hour minimum wage has a real impact on things.
Yes, it does.
And it's amazing how quickly employers can adapt to, well, if that's going to be the expense, it actually makes more sense for us to farm out some of these things to robots.
Yeah. So again, that's just another issue on the table, just the whole economic battle. And Kelly's right. I mean, I think there are some candidates listening right now. You may just have to start thinking about, you wouldn't have ever had to say, well, I'm against a single payer plan, a government plan. Now, again, it's portrayed as Medicare for all. But if you start listening to even what Bernie Sanders is saying of what you would have to do in order for this to make, it's going to sound a lot more real quickly like the VA for all. And, people like Medicare because, after all, it's, you can be on it, you cannot be on it. You have the private sector, you have the public sector, and you've paid into it and all sorts of things. And so it sounds good to call it Medicare for all, but when you start getting into the fine details, it looks a lot more like the government taking over just about everything in health care.
The Soviet Union's what it is.
And that just doesn't look quite as positive as I would think. So that's one issue. The other is this one, Michael Barone, we've posted that too, liberals against freedom of conscience. That's surfacing as well. And it's back to the key issue, that is, we just really need to begin to change this, because this decision that came out of California was 5-4. This decision that came out of Illinois on unions, that was 5-4. The decision out of Colorado, that was 7-2, but realistically, it probably was 5-4. So we need to get our people in there, because this idea of freedom of conscience is being used as an excuse to exploit union members, exploit LGBT members, and that's showing up in the campaigns too.
Yeah, and I was shocked to see this article because, I think he nails the thing. I mean, look at the three cases at the Supreme Court this turn. One is whether the government can force a pro-life crisis pregnancy center to basically promote where you can get a free abortion. Okay. Not can the government say, we want to promote this, but can it force you to participate in a message you disagree with?
Compelled speech.
Yeah. And then the second one is, can they do that by taking your money, by saying, oh, you want to work? Well, if you're going to work, we're going to make you give money, and people are going to use that money to say things you disagree with. I mean, again, what I just described, every American would go, no, you can't do that in this country. Well, that's what those cases were. 5-4. 5-4. The government can compel you to say things and fund speech that you totally disagree with. That should not be 5-4. It should be 9-0. And the unfortunate thing is we have this weird thing now where the liberals used to be for free speech. And now they're for free speech as long as it's liberal speech. And if it's conservative speech or a different idea, they actually want the government to shut it down. They don't want other people to have those freedoms. And That's what this article is really about by Michael Barone. If you haven't read it, I encourage people to read it.
Yeah, Michael Barone, it's been really been years since we've had him on, and again, it was very good. And at the very end, I love what he does. He also quotes somebody else that hasn't been on in years, Yale professor Stephen Carter, who wrote some great books on civility and others, that in the Atlantic said, every law is violent because behind every exercise of law stands the sheriff. And when we come back to that, I want to get, I haven't had Jeremy's comments yet about compelled speech. And this is another one of those campaign issues that's starting to show up because they're saying we can just not allow another Neil Gorsuch on the court or a Brett Kavanaugh because they're going to take away all of our rights. And so I'm starting to see this in some of these campaign speeches. And again, recognizing the one in California, this passed the California Assembly, it passed the California Senate, was signed by the governor, even ratified by the Ninth Circuit Court. So there's a lot of people that say, yeah, that's what we need to do. We'll be back right after this.
The birth rate in the U.S. has hit an all-time low. Replacement-level fertility requires an average of 2.1 children per woman. Ours is roughly 1.76. Fewer women are having children, and the ones who do are having fewer of them. A Pew Research survey done in June reveals that Americans like the idea of larger families. According to the study, 41% of U.S. adults think that families of 3 or more children is ideal, but millennials are just not going there. Melissa Langsam-Bronstein writes for The Federalist. Lately, she's been tackling issues surrounding millennials and marriage. Her analysis of the trends leads her to conclude that millennials will either have fewer children than they'd wanted or opt out of parenthood altogether. Ms. Bronstein encourages millennials to take a leap of faith and have babies despite their worries. She writes, "The world has never been problem-free, and sometimes we need to act in spite of that." Millennials are very concerned about the high cost of childcare. Melissa Bronstein points out that the first 5 years are the most costly in this category. She suggests soliciting help from family members, adjusting work schedules, and trading off childcare with other parents. I'd add figuring out ways for moms to work part-time from home. Lots of millennials say they aren't having kids because they can't afford a house. But, writes Ms. Bronstein, babies can live in apartments. Besides, you won't regret the sacrifices you make to be a parent. One study of millennials shows 36% of respondents choosing to forego having kids because they want leisure time, 18% saying career is a greater priority, and 14% saying they work too much to have children. Melissa Bronstein urges her generation to rethink these priorities. As millennials age, these concerns will evaporate. They'll miss those kids, and so will society. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to get into a lot of the religious liberty cases in the next hour, but before we finish off on that, I want to talk again about some of these issues surfacing in the campaigns, and this one has to do with this idea of freedom of conscience. Michael Barone's piece is up there. I might point you to the one yesterday by David French, which I thought was very well done as well, because he said, the secular world sort of sees that when we have any religious convictions, it's kind of like a Jenga tower. If you ever play Jenga, you can pull out sometimes one plank and it doesn't fall. Of course, you pull out enough, it all falls. And the point he's making is that that's the secular world that's going, well, why can't you just compromise on this particular issue, whether it's the Crisis Pregnancy Center, whether in this case it was Catholic hospitals, or whether it's Masterpiece Cake Shop or whatever. And Jeremy, I'd love to get your comments because we've had these 5-4 decisions. Of course, Masterpiece was 7-2, but there are some that are running on the idea that we just need to get enough Democrats in the Senate so that we don't have any more Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaughs on the court, and that we reverse these 5-4 to go the other direction.
Well, let's remember we live in a democratic republic governed by a constitution, and we are not a judiciocracy. In other words, we are not run by the judiciary, and yet these progressives in the Democratic Party, and frankly, that is the Democratic Party right now, if you ascribe to that belief, is pressuring to say, look, we can't get things done in the Congress, we can't get things done in the White House. Where do we have left to turn but to the judges themselves? And this has been the reason they are so animated by Justice Gorsuch and Judge Kavanaugh and him becoming a potential Supreme Court justice, is because they understand that their primary mode of power has been exposed and has been laid bare. And people now are understanding, oh, wait a minute, you really don't care so much about the legislative process, or else you would have won at the ballot box, or at least your ideas have not sold at the ballot box, and therefore your votes within the Congress themselves, you have to be much more to the center, to the right of things in order to be successful in the political world. But you don't have the backstop any longer within the courts. Why are they so upset with President Trump and his judicial nominations? This is why. Because they don't have that judicial backstop anymore to invalidate things with the stroke of a pen. You know, there was a big debate here recently about nationwide injunctions, as if that's some sort of newfangled device that the conservatives have dreamt up to be able to lay waste to the country. Well, wait a minute, there was just a nationwide injunction put on one of these 3D printed guns the other day.
There you go.
All of a sudden, the left is all excited about nationwide injunctions. We should do more of them. No, we don't live in a judiciocracy. We don't live in a country that is governed by judges themselves. But and then just to bring this all back to the point of conscience, that gets to the same direction. David's piece, I thought, was very prescient when he said, and I think I'm paraphrasing pretty well, that the left is basically saying, hey, look, thanks so much for the good job feeding the homeless, caring for the children, taking care of the sick and the poor and the needy in St. Mary's Health Clinic there and St. Joseph's, that and the other thing. Where you don't see a whole lot of atheist hospitals or things like that, progressive hospitals. But now they're saying, hey, look, we'll get it from here. Or if you want to continue to do this, you know, you've been doing it all. This formula you've had for 2,000 years of caring for the sick, the poor, and the needy, you know, that's all well and good. But if you want to continue to do it, you have to do it as we tell you to do it.
Right.
That's the point of those pieces, to say, no, this is a time for religious people of faith, to say, no. This is very important that this continue. The same faith that motivated the Jesuits to go into the far reaches of the darkest continents to care for the people and to teach them how to read is the same faith that motivates nuns to say, no, I can't have that abortifacient as a part of my healthcare plan. And it's the same idea based. I mean, I love Attorney General Sessions' comments on Monday, opening this talk about the Religious Liberty Task Force, which we'll talk about later on, I'm sure. But he says, we've seen nuns ordered to buy contraceptives. You know, we put an end with Attorney General Sessions to an administration previous to this one that was suing nuns over birth control. And let's not forget how absurd that actually is. And so, yes, it's very important that we go back to this idea that, and it's a liberal idea, classical liberal idea, that we allow people to have their expression so that others will have the freedom to have their conscience and their expression as well. As the ACLU has so well put, it's on their website today. You can go read about it. They said freedom of expression for ourselves requires freedom of expression for others. By the way, just as an aside, I said that to a reporter earlier this week in an interview, and she said, are they representing Jack Phillips? I said, no, they're actually prosecuting him. So maybe they ought to re-examine their commitment to these things.
Yeah, this is about freedom. And it's really sad, and it's kind of shocking to watch the way this is lining up. You've got Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz.
You know, he's been marginalized by his fellow liberals because he's standing for the very things liberals used to stand for.
Yeah, it's really odd to watch. I mean, here's a guy who voted for Hillary Clinton, who wanted her to be president, but he's watching these things go on and go, this is wrong. And, really, I mean, I don't understand how it's gotten so bad and so one-sided, because really what we're talking about in all this is one little principle, and that is a principle that every Christian should agree with, and that is the ends do not justify the means. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening here is the people on the other side are like, yeah, but I don't like his speech. And it's like, no. Do you like freedom? Should he have the right to speak?
Yeah.
Do you want the right to speak? And people have just lost their sensibilities. I mean, and again, it used to be that every American would say, of course the ends don't justify the means. Now, I mean, I think you'd say, throw Trump in the Senate and it would be like 100%, on the other side. Well, do the ends justify the means if it means you get to whack, Donald Trump? It'd be, oh, yeah, the ends justify the means. He should have no freedom. Let's do everything we can to him. It's sad to watch. It's sad to watch an opinion at the Supreme Court about whether the government can now be given the power to force citizens to say things that violate their conscience. Again, I want you to think about this. It's not that the government wants to say something that you disagree with. There's no reason for the government to say, I want to force you to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? This is the ultimate intolerance and loss of freedom. And four the justices says, yeah, I think that's okay. For the government to force you to say it. I want the government to tell the crisis pregnancy centers they have to put the 800 number out on where you can get your free abortion. That's totally unnecessary. It's intolerant. It violates freedom of speech. It violates freedom of religion. It goes against everything that this country is about. I mean, and we're the fact that we're at a 5-4 on that it should frighten everybody and give hope that Justice Kavanaugh will not be going that direction.
Right.
And I hope and I believe God is going to replace more. And I think this 5-4 has begun to disappear.
Well, as you've said before, it's bad enough for the government to censor your speech. It's even worse for the government to put a gun at your head and force you to say that compelled speech. And, of course, this week we talked with Gary Bauer about the fact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, I know I'm 85, but John Paul Stevens stayed till he was 90, so I think I have 5 more years. But I'm thinking some people are saying maybe not. And
you're not in control of that.
And boy, if you think the battle over Brett Kavanaugh is going to be something, can you imagine if for some reason she stepped down or whatever?
What happens in this election, though? What if in this election there are 4 or 5 more Republicans in the Senate? Then all of a sudden it doesn't get so difficult. What if, though, it's Democrat? Then you got just a total disaster. I mean, what are you going to do? Trump versus the Democratic Senate. I mean, we will sit with 8 justices probably for 2 years is what would happen. So that'll all depend upon what happens in this midterm election in the Senate.
Well, I think you've made the case for how important this election is. When we come back, we're going to talk about what Attorney General Sessions said, the Religious Liberty Task Force, and some very important. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Just over 100 years ago, 2 or 3 cents would buy you what it takes $1 to buy today. What of any real value can you buy for $1? Well, how about this? How about enabling one listener to hear Point of View not just today, but for an entire year? You heard right. $1 makes it possible to reach a person through the radio or through any of our online channels for a year and pays for all the other resources available through our website. All the interviews with special guests and public officials, all the information, all the training, all the inspiration and transformation for $1. How many dollars will you invest in the future of our nation? How many lives can you change with your investment today? Call right now and reach more people to help change our nation. 1-800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net, because $1 really can go a long, long way. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Final hour today. If you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. I know most of you on our Friday weekend editions like to just sit back. You know, sometimes we get into these and the phones ring off the hook. But I know when you hear these experts here, most of the time you want to listen. But if you have a comment or a question, we certainly welcome that as well. Kelly Shackelford, Jeremy Dias with us. And let me just mention for a minute, we've got some really good press releases here. And the first one I thought I would focus on: college football coaching legend Bobby Bowden to the U.S. Supreme Court. Let Coach Kennedy pray. And this one is on the website for people to read and to pass on. And as we're getting to football season, I think this is a great opportunity to focus once again on the plight of Coach Kennedy.
Yeah, this Coach Kennedy, of course, is the coach who was fired for going to a knee after the football game for 15 to 20 seconds silently by himself to simply pray and give thanks to the Lord for the privilege of coaching the young men he got to coach. He was fired for that. Before that, he had served 20 years in the Marines, fought for our freedoms in our country, and then they took it away from him and fired him because of his faith. And that case is now at the United States Supreme Court, and we're waiting to hear their decision probably this fall about whether they take the case or not. And so I think this is significant because a number of people jumped in this week, including Coach Bobby Bowden, saying you need to take this case. This is important. 12 attorney generals, state attorney generals, a number of people. And so we're really hopeful that this will highlight and bring more attention to the fact, and the court will realize, this is something significant that affects the entire country in pretty dramatic ways and really needs to be dealt with.
Jeremy, help us out with this, because if I remember the case, it said that even if somebody could possibly see you, and this could be at the 50-yard line, but it could be in your own classroom or anything, this is such an egregious kind of ruling that this one definitely has to be overturned, doesn't it?
Boy, we sure hope so. Look, if what the Bremerton High School said was that Coach Kennedy was engaging in demonstrative religious activity, and that was forbidden on school grounds, apparently. So if the students and fans could see him taking a knee and maybe they thought he was tying his shoe, no, the school district said, no, we know what you're really doing. If a teacher were to, if a coach were to cross himself after he says a silent prayer when the star quarterback goes down with an ACL tear, then that coach could be fired as well. If the Buddhist coach were to say a chant afterwards, the Jewish coach wears his yarmulke on the sidelines, teacher in the hallways wearing her crucifix. These are all demonstrative religious activities that, under the school district's own policy, would be grounds to terminate you. And if you want to take it this far, it's true. If the teacher says grace silently over her salad before she eats lunch in the lunchroom and the students can see her, that's forbidden activity that now makes them subject to termination. Or a student sneezes and a teacher says, God bless you. That's a demonstrative religious activity for which that teacher must be fired.
Yeah, and again, we've had cases where just saying, I'll pray for you can get you in trouble. And so it just shows that level of hostility. And Kelly, even in this press release, you say banning all coaches from praying just because they can be seen as wrong and obviously contradicts the Constitution.
It does. And I would tell people they can actually, people are like, what can I do? I know I can pray. They can go to the website, and there's, number one, there are shirts which show that it's the image of Coach Kennedy kneeling. I would encourage people to get the shirts. I think, football season is coming up. It's actually probably a great witnessing tool for you because people are going to say, what's that? Or ask questions, and you're going to be able to talk about your faith, and and really it's going to be a conversation opener, but it also maybe be an opportunity to talk about Coach Kennedy and to get people to be reminded to pray, because this fall the court's going to make a decision about that, and they're really neat shirts. I'd encourage people to go to.
And they are Texas certified. I've now lived in Texas for 3 years. Just the other day it was 111 degrees out, and I was wearing this T-shirt, and it kept me nice and cool, because you got to wear a certain variety of shirt here in Texas, or else you get way too hot. This one will do you well.
Yeah, and we've got a picture of it there. And, of course, you can go to the website, which actually, interestingly enough, is click under either the picture of Kelly Shackelford or Jeremy Dice, and you can see that. And, again, that's a donation that you can have. But also, you've encouraged people to write a note to him or to sign your petition. Talk about all the action items for just a minute. And I might also mention, since we mentioned those 12 state attorney generals, also Franklin Graham, NFL players like Chad Hennings and Steve Largent, and not only Bobby Bowden and others, 15 members of Congress. You're getting a groundswell right now, aren't you?
Yeah, people. This is the most probably known about religious liberty case in the country. President Trump, when he was candidate Trump, tweeted about it twice, said this shouldn't happen in this country. This is really one that people have their eyes on. And so I really think it's important, too, because how many coaches are people of faith, and how many teachers, how many people work for government that are people of faith? And if all of a sudden now the new law is you can't ever do anything that anybody would ever think is religious, we've got a real problem in this country. So pray for the court to take this and to get this reversed. And who knows, maybe the court will take this, and maybe Justice Kavanaugh will be sitting there, and as you mentioned earlier, he's aware of football, so he'll be aware of the atmosphere here. And
he played football.
And I fully suspect that he'll defend the Constitution and follow what the Constitution says, and that's what we want. We want somebody who's not looking to sort of make law or do something that they want to do, but actually looks and goes, golly, there's a free speech clause in here. Oh, gosh, there's a free exercise of religion in here. Maybe we should enforce that and protect that against the government. That's what we're hoping for.
Jeremy, let me come to you, because another action item, obviously, people get the T-shirt, they can sign some things, but this is the time when we're getting close to school. A lot of kids that are going to play football are doing 2-a-days, and you know what happens. They will bring in somebody from Fellowship of Christian Athletes. They'll bring in a local pastor. They'll bring in a former football player who will mention God or mention Jesus or have some scripture verse, and those individuals, Americans for Separation of Church and State, or the ACLU, or Freedom from Religion Foundation, they're going to object to that. So there's some resources available at First Liberty so that people know what their rights are.
That's right. There are a couple different directions. One, mom and dad, if you're getting ready for back to school stuff right now, you're getting the pencils and paper and the tissues and everything else you got to bring to class these days for your students, getting all the new clothes and the backpacks and all that together. Make sure one of those essential items that is in that backpack and in your kitchen is our toolkit for religious liberty for students. Your students are going to run up against stuff this year. I can guarantee it. Something's going to happen. You're going to have a conversation in the hallway talking about VBS from the summer, and a teacher's going to overhear it and wonder whether or not that's an endorsement of or a violation of the separation of church and state. Your kid's going to give a presentation in class or want to reference his or her faith as he reviews a book or talks in a speech or gives a graduation speech later on this year. Be prepared to know what your rights actually are. The time to know what your rights are is not when you have the problem. It's when you're starting out in the year so that you know what to do when you run into these issues. We're here to help you. And don't forget, we don't charge for our services. You don't pay a bill when you're one of our clients. So go to firstliberty.org, download these resources, and get your T-shirt for Coach Kennedy while you're there.
When we come back, I want to talk about your First Liberty briefing, because this week you talked about hosting religious clubs, and we'll get to that and some military stories right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Perhaps you have heard of the latest environmental movement to ban plastic straws. Even though they're small, they are large in number. The activists claim that there are millions of straws used every day. That number seems high, at least to me, since I avoid using plastic straws. I figure I don't need a straw when I drink water or beverage at home. Why do I need one in a restaurant? And if I go to a Starbucks, I have a personal cup with a straw that I rinse out when I'm done. As Christians, we should practice sound stewardship of the environment, but I also think we need to think carefully about the impact of a plastic straw ban. On the one hand, all these straws end up as litter in landfills and in the ocean. On the other hand, there are some people, those with disabilities and small children, for example, that actually need a straw to drink. At the moment, the biggest plastic pollution challenge is in our oceans, and plastic straws aren't the problem. Large plastic floating islands in the ocean are a major environmental issue. Perhaps the best known is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that floats between California and Japan. The nonprofit Ocean Cleanup has discovered that the Pacific Patch is much larger than originally estimated. But plastic straws and plastic bags aren't the reason. Nearly half of it was fishing nets. When combined with ropes and line, it accounted for a majority of the trash. The rest included hard plastics like crates and bottle caps, and when Ocean Cleanup looked at food packaging, they found that nearly a third was written in Japanese and nearly a third was written in Chinese. None of this is to argue against the reducing of our use of plastic straws, but it does remind us that if we want to address the problem of plastic pollution, we should focus more attention on things other than plastic straws. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Might alert some of you in the military. This one is going to get you upset again because we're going to be talking about some of these chaplain cases. But before we do, Jeremy, I just mentioned that if people go to the website, pointofview.net, or go to First Liberty, either way, but at our First Liberty link that we have there, we have your First Liberty briefings. And people have been able to hear these over time. And earlier this week, you talked about a particular case involving Awana clubs, of all things. Hosting religious clubs in a school is nothing to be concerned about. Well, apparently some people are. And it's just one more illustration that it's a back-to-school time. It's now August. Pretty soon, we're going to be having some of those meetings. And there are some that are just convinced that if there's a Fellowship of Christian Athletes individual, if there is a pastor from a church, if there's an Awana group that just gets mentioned at all at public schools, you know, there's supposed to be a separation of church and state. So educate us a little bit on what are the rights.
Yeah, look, the rule of thumb here is that if there's a student group that's been created, the chess club, or some sort of extracurricular or non-curricular activity that's taking place, then the school district really cannot keep out the religious version of that as well. And so I remember one year we had a student club that wanted to form. They had a Frisbee club. They had the golf club. They had all these different clubs that were out there. This was on Long Island, if I remember right. And the student wanted to go form his religious club. And the principal in charge, the assistant principal in charge of that particular issue said that it was illegal in New York for the student to have a religious club on campus of their school. And so we sent a letter. Actually, our network attorney sent a letter as they were flying from New York to Geneva, Switzerland, if I remember right. They sent it from above the Atlantic. And before they landed, we had actually settled that case. It was a pretty cool little experience there. But then a year later, that same school and the same student and the same club tried to reapply again, and the school district did the same thing over again. And so we sent another letter and had a whole lot more fun. That doesn't need to happen. And sometimes even with your best efforts of threatening a lawsuit and explaining to them what the law actually says, it still isn't enough for people to get it. But you know what was interesting that came out of that case in particular is that there was a young lady watching on the other coast of Long Island, and she tried to do the same thing. And her principal said that it was illegal as well. And because she had seen what had happened on the other coast and knew who to call, she gave us a call saying, no, I know this isn't right because I saw what you guys did. I've read your toolkit. I know what needs to happen here. And we were able to help her out as well. And today her brother's running that club. You know, it's things like that people go and find out what their resources are. They know what the information is. They go to our website at firstliberty.org. They learn first what they're able to do. And then if and when they run into a problem, they know that there's somebody that's going to be to stand with them free of charge, whether that's me standing there on Long Island with my client or our network attorneys flying over to Geneva sending a letter in the midair that settles the case within 7 hours of us sending the demand letter over. We're going to be there to help you out. And the best part is you're not going to get a bill for it.
Yeah. And again, these students, they're sometimes bolder than the parents are. You know, I'm thinking the Kuntz cheerleaders. I'm thinking about a number of valedictorians and others that have stood up there. So knowing your rights and then making sure that you exercise your rights so you don't lose them are all just good principles. And again, the resources are available at the website, First Liberty or Point of View, either way. And one of the other stories I want to get into, and I want to alert all of our military people out there, of which we seem to, every time we talk about this, have a number call in, has to do with the chaplains. Now, we've talked a little bit about Scott Squires, but then also this is Casey Griffin. So, Kelly, this again, we have posted under your picture here the 2-page press release so people can read it. Because every time people hear this, they go, no, that can't be the case. So we want you to be able to read it and then educate yourself about that and then sign up to be an encouragement to some of these individuals.
Absolutely. In fact, in this case, with Chaplain Squires, we have a petition and ways they could definitely make a difference, and I really would encourage them to do that. This is a great, not only a great chaplain, but just somebody who's really served us. I mean, Chaplain Squires has the Bronze Star. He was awarded the Meritorious Service Award 5 times. I mean, his service to the country is really incredible. And he's a chaplain. And if you look at the Army regulations, what they say is your endorsing group, your denomination, which you have to get approved by to be a chaplain, you are to follow their beliefs. And that's what he does. And so on the issue of same-sex marriage, Southern Baptist and certainly this chaplain cannot participate in, officiating at such thing or giving marriage counseling or anything else. So 2 women approached him and said, hey, we want to be a part of your marriage conference. And he explained he couldn't, but he referred her to another chaplain who didn't have his restrictions. That's exactly what the Army regulations say to do. So why are we talking about this? Because they decided to persecute him. They complained. And instead of the fact, oh, well, he's following his denomination and he's following the law, he's been a good chaplain, they decided, no, we don't like that. So we're going to say he's engaged in discrimination. And yeah, we know that the regulations say he's to follow his denomination and everything, but we think that it's now trumped by our new sexual orientation laws. And we're going to destroy his career. His career's going to be over. We don't care if he got the Bronze Star. We don't care any of that stuff. He's on the wrong political side now by following his beliefs, and he's out. It's just outrageous that this would happen. And then it got worse because his assistant is now being dragged through the mud as well. What does his assistant do? His chaplain's assistant, what they did is when the same-sex couple came, she said, oh, well, let me check with the chaplain. That's what she did. And for that, she's now a part of the discrimination. And her college, she was going to have actually, through a program, she was going to actually have free college.
Green to gold. Yeah.
Green to gold. It's over now. And Jeremy can fill in more details. But the point is, this is a persecution of this chaplain and this chaplain's assistant. I mean, I just feel horrible for her. I mean, she's a young African-American woman who had her college in front of her, who had her way to be officer, and it's all been destroyed. Why? For what? for doing nothing wrong. And, of course, Chaplain Squires didn't do anything wrong anyway, and they're going after him despite his record. And this, if this is allowed, then every chaplain is done, because you can't follow your beliefs, you can't follow the Bible, you can't follow your denomination, or we'll destroy you, is the message. That's not what the law is, but that's what they're trying to make the law. And so this has to be overturned, and we have to win for Chaplain Squires.
Jeremy, give us some details, because sometimes when I try to explain these to other people, when I speak at a group or I talk about religious liberty, people say, there must be more to that. You know, she must have said something derogatory towards these individuals, or she must have done something to hurt these people's feelings, because you can't imagine somebody being dragged through the mud just because she delivered the message to the chaplain. Tell us the rest of the story here.
I wish people would stop saying that. They wouldn't say that if it happened to them. They know what's going on here. And in this case, you have a general who's to blame here. Because what happened is when Sergeant Griffin had this complaint lodged against her, the Army did an investigation, recommended that she be disciplined for discrimination and violating the equal opportunity policy of the Army. Well, the colonel, her immediate supervisor, reviewed it and said, no, she didn't violate any policy here. She's perfectly fine, cleared her charges. And they appealed that case then to the general, General Sontag, who's the commanding officer on that base there. General Sontag is a two-star general whose job it is in the military to make decisions, life and death decisions, to send men and women into battle to their deaths, if necessary, to defend our freedom. And yet he has refused to review this appeal. He has actually intentionally refused to make a decision because he doesn't want to offend one side or the other or whatever, because he's scared, apparently, of having to make a decision as to whether or not this young lady can continue on her career or not, or have it ruined. And so because of that indecision, and it is an intentional indecision, we heard this past week from the general's office that he's just simply choosing not to respond. We asked him to at least remove the flag on her file that this is an ongoing investigation, so that she could continue in this Green to Gold program, which is a highly selective program in the military that allows enlisted members to move through ROTC in college, a full ride scholarship, and come out an officer in the military. It's a huge deal for enlisted men and women in our armed forces. And Casey had 3-star generals recommending her to this program. And yet General Sontag said, no, I refuse to remove that flag. And now Casey won't be able to go to that Green to Gold program. She's lost the chance of going to college and becoming an officer, all because General Sontag simply refuses to make a decision. That has no business. There is no legitimate reason for this whatsoever, other than the fact that General Sontag is engaged in anti-religious bias at the highest levels, and he needs to be removed from command. And I call on Secretary Mattis to make that happen today. He needs to be held accountable for ruining this young lady's career and her future in education. Can you imagine how hard this young African-American soldier has worked to get to this point in her life? To have 3-star generals recommending her for a highly selective program, and now one general, because he just simply doesn't want to make a decision, it's too hard. Oh, I'm so sorry, General. Make the decision. Allow this lady to go forward. Goodness gracious.
Well, and again, there's a way that you can get involved. We'll talk more about your involvement. And if you'd like to involve the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Imagine a police officer telling you you can't pray in your own home. That happened not too long ago to Mary Ann Souse in Kansas. And in 2017, the U.S. 10th Circuit Court of Appeals sided with the officer. But this year, thanks to an investment of $1, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned that ruling. Okay, let me explain. Over the years, listeners to Point of View have made a big difference. Some have become congressmen. Others have saved lives through helping women in crisis pregnancies. Others have become constitutional attorneys, like Kelly Shackelford, who represented Mary Ann Souse. We recently discovered it costs about $1 to reach a Point of View listener on the radio and online for an entire year. You can't buy much for $1 these days, but you can transform the nation. Call today and invest in Point of View at 1-800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net, because $1 really can go a long, long way. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, we'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford, Jeremy Dice with us, and we will take some calls in just a minute. But one of the things I wanted to focus on is this Religious Liberty Task Force. And just to give you a sense of how it is not well covered by the press, we posted this piece from the Huffington Post in which they had all these Twitter posts about the Religious Liberty Task Force. People saying, well, Religious Liberty Task Force, that sounds like something from the Crusades, or that sounds like something from the Taliban, or one had a burning cross. If you were just to pay attention to some of these Twitter posts, or the way in which it was, I think, in some cases misrepresented in some of the articles, they would think that you and Jeremy had been to a really controversial meeting instead of one that was very significant in terms of history.
Yeah, it was historic. The Justice Department created a Religious Liberty Task Force. The top lawyers at the Department of Justice who are going to make sure that the religious liberty guidelines and laws are implemented. This goes back to the president who ran as somebody who promised to restore religious freedom. He became president. He followed through by passing an executive order. In that executive order, one of the things was telling the Attorney General to create guidelines for religious freedom that could then be really sent and applied throughout all the federal agencies and departments. Attorney General Sessions did that, and they were excellent. The guidelines were really excellent. We were kind of blown away by how solid they were. And but that just means that they were sent. It doesn't mean that everybody was, following them. I mean, for instance, our statement is General Mattis evidently didn't get the memo because we keep having these chaplain cases and all these situations in the military. And so this task force will now make sure that the law is actually implemented, that religious freedom and accommodation of people's religion is actually enforced, not only throughout the federal agencies themselves, but forcing them to treat citizens in a way that is in favor of religious freedom. So this is unheard of. It's never happened. But to have a portion of the Justice Department, of the top lawyers for the government, and these are that top levels, committed to a task force that will now be following through, implementing, taking information as it comes in, and really being a leading voice in ensuring that religious freedom is protected. That has never happened in our country.
One of the things you learn about in Washington, D.C., having lived there when I went to Georgetown, is you can see how important the government takes by who is in the meeting. When you had Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, had Rod Rosenstein, assistant, this was a way of saying, we're really taking this seriously.
Yeah, it was all the top people across the board. It was obvious. I mean, for the Attorney General to do this, period, is really unheard of. So, so Attorney General Sessions needs to be, applauded for this, and the president, who's ultimately responsible for all this as well, because this was all really initiated when the president ran and said, we're going to do some things about religious freedom. He passed the executive order, got the Attorney General going, and now the Attorney General is even taking it to the next step.
I want to get Jeremy's comments in just a minute. Let me take a phone call just along the way, and we'll go to Chris in Virginia. Chris, what you want to add to our conversation today?
Yes, I want to listen. I'm a little behind the conversation. I'm listening on Tune In, and I've had a pause for a few minutes. But back, we were talking about the resources for going back to school and everything.
Yes.
You have resources to teach people, to inform them of their rights. Well, until the government makes a law against something, you have that right. I mean, it's sad that we live in a day that you have to inform the parents of students what their rights are, and supposedly the freest country on the planet. It infuriates me.
Let me add one more. It's bad enough that you have to inform the parents. It's even worse. You have to inform Jeremy, the administrators, the headmasters, the principals, and others, right?
Well, absolutely. Look, we represent a student from last year's school year, Sam Blackledge, who's going to give his valedictory address, and he wanted to reference his faith when he did so, and the school district wouldn't let him do that. Well, is this a novel issue? No. In fact, it's been in black and white since the year 2000, I think, on the Department of Education's website, in a letter that they send out to the school districts every single year in the country here, that says that students can reference their faith during speeches like this if they have control over their remarks, which he did. So, I mean, look, sometimes it takes applying the law for people to be reminded that they can't just push people around from a religious perspective because they don't agree with what they want to say.
But the advantage to our religious liberty toolkits that we have, the pamphlets and things that tell people what their rights are, is a lot of people are scared. They don't know. They get worried. And once you see, no, the law protect. Even if they wanted to do something to you, they can't because you have these rights in these specific situations. So whether it's a parent, a student, a teacher, those are all laid out in the materials so that people can walk without fear and really in boldness in knowing the freedoms they do have as Americans.
Chris, any other comments?
And
go ahead.
Yeah, it's great that we have that, but it's sad that we need that.
Yeah.
It infuriates me.
Indeed. It would be more sad if we lost it, too. That's why we have those resources and why we want to encourage students like yours and others to be able to go out there and assert their rights. In fact, the way we lose those, by the way, is not by failing to somehow know our rights. It's failing to transmit them to the next generation. So I'm sure you're doing that with your kids and those around you. But, if this happens at your school, and I'm not saying yours in particular, but in your school for all these listeners, if you're not prepared to respond to them, guess what dies? Just a little bit of freedom. And then next year, we've got to actually expand this toolkit because people forgot to apply it and read it last year. So this is why we make a big deal about this. Know what your rights are, and then when they are questioned, don't allow them to be pushed over because the behemoth of progressive ideology that wants to shut down this idea of religious liberty simply grows through inaction. And if you and I are not responding to those and saying, no, enough is enough, it's going to continue to grow in a very bad manner.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, appreciate you calling in. And I think you just represent, again, the view of a lot of people just saying it's just amazing you have to do this. We were talking about this Religious Liberty Task Force, and I'd love to get your comments, Jeremy, because, again, you're sitting in the meeting and then you probably saw some of the press coverage and you go, were they at the same place?
Yeah, look at this press coverage. This HuffPo article that you posted here, I love this. They quote from General Sessions. And let me just read the quote because it's just fantastic. He says, "We've seen nuns ordered to buy contraceptives. We've seen the United States senators ask judicial and executive branch nominees about dogma. We've all seen the ordeal faced so bravely by Jack Phillips." That was how he opened his remarks. Now, somehow that goes into the machine of HuffPo, and out pops this line, which is the summary of what happened. They say, and I'm quoting directly from the article by Mary Peppenfuss, and she writes, "Twitter exploded with critics charging that the Religious Liberty Task Force was a front to protect religious zealots attacking LGBTQ rights and an unconstitutional push to marry church and state on the altar of Christianity." Now, I don't know how you put Sessions lines in and you get that out the other side of things. Look, I was there. I was sitting right beside Kelly on the front row. We watched what happened. And here was a 4 or 5 hour summit on religious liberty at the Department of Justice. Like Kelly said, historic event. Never occurred before in the Department of Justice. Interestingly, followed about a week after the Department of State held its first ministerial on religious liberty as well.
That's right.
Good things happening in the Trump administration on religious liberty. But, we sat there, and after General Sessions sat down, we heard from the head of the Civil Rights Division, the head of the Civil Division, the acting head of the Civil Rights Division. He spoke as well. They're all in attendance. These are the highest levels of the people of the Department of Justice right now. And then they left, and we had a panel get up there. Well, who's the first guy to speak? It was a Jewish rabbi. And this Jewish rabbi got up there and say, "Hey, look, I've been working for 10 plus years to try to build a synagogue, a place for my fellow believers to sit down and pray together. And I've gotten a runaround by the city of Boca Raton. I've had to pay 5 figures of dollars in complying with permits and fees and zoning laws that, meanwhile, you've got movie theaters and strip clubs and things like that are opening up all over the place, but my local synagogue can't be kept up." Well, it's a familiar story because we represent a bunch of Jewish rabbis up in Airmont, New York, and one of our rabbis wanted to have a prayer meeting in his garage, and he spent $20,000+ trying to comply with the city's zoning laws, only to be rewarded with a ticket from the city that could have netted him a several $1,000 fine or some time in jail. I mean, goodness sakes, these are the things that were there. So we saw a Jewish rabbi. We saw a Sikh individual talk about the trouble his religious faith community faces in the community today. A Muslim attorney, Jack Phillips, was there talking about his case. Some Catholic bishops were there talking. This was a cross-section of America talking about how important religious liberty is to our country today and why it needs to remain the focus of our Department of Justice.
Well, again, one of the reasons I posted this one from the Huffington Post was just so you could see how it is completely misrepresenting what took place. And when we come back, I want to talk with Kelly because he had a chance to be on with Shannon Bream on Fox, and she was bringing up some other articles and comments as well. And, of course, all the way through, I loved Kelly sometimes just say freedom. And then again, he'd say freedom. And after a while, it sounded like William Wallace at Braveheart. Freedom! The point here is freedom, but people seem to be missing it. So we'll come back and educate you on that issue right after this.
The birth rate in the U.S. has hit an all-time low. Replacement-level fertility requires an average of 2.1 children per woman. Ours is roughly 1.76. Fewer women are having children, and the ones who do are having fewer of them. A Pew Research survey done in June reveals that Americans like the idea of larger families. According to the study, 41% of U.S. adults think that families of 3 or more children is ideal, but millennials are just not going there. Melissa Langsam-Bronstein writes for The Federalist. Lately, she's been tackling issues surrounding millennials and marriage. Her analysis of the trends leads her to conclude that millennials will either have fewer children than they'd wanted or opt out of parenthood altogether. Ms. Bronstein encourages millennials to take a leap of faith and have babies despite their worries. She writes, "The world has never been problem-free, and sometimes we need to act in spite of that." Millennials are very concerned about the high cost of childcare. Melissa Bronstein points out that the first 5 years are the most costly in this category. She suggests soliciting help from family members, adjusting work schedules, and trading off childcare with other parents. I'd add figuring out ways for moms to work part-time from home. Lots of millennials say they aren't having kids because they can't afford a house. But, writes Ms. Bronstein, babies can live in apartments. Besides, you won't regret the sacrifices you make to be a parent. One study of millennials shows 36% of respondents choosing to forego having kids because they want leisure time, 18% saying career is a greater priority, and 14% saying they work too much to have children. Melissa Bronstein urges her generation to rethink these priorities. As millennials age, these concerns will evaporate. They'll miss those kids, and so will society. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Time for a few more minutes. We're going to get into another issue, but let me just take another phone call because I haven't done very good at getting phone calls on today. So we'll go to Alabama. Ken, I think you have a point of view, and I'd love to hear it.
Thank you, sir. I was listening to a tape by, unfortunately, the now late Dr. Chuck Missler, an excellent Bible teacher who not only was a Bible teacher but an engineer and understood a lot of things about science and computers. And this was before there ever was a Facebook or Twitter. And he said, you know, you never filter something, if you're going to filter at all, you never filter it at the source. you always filtered at the receiving end. And I got to thinking about that. Well, of course, that's why the Founding Fathers were for free speech. And I got to thinking, and I'm doing this kind of tongue-in-cheek, but, it's said that Paul Revere rode through the streets of Boston yelling, "The British are coming, the British are coming." And, of course, I think that was free speech. You had the right to either try to do something about it, that would have been great, or if you did want to do something about it, that was great too. But what if Paul Revere had to use Facebook or Twitter to try to get his message out, and, the British are coming might be marked as hate speech and might have been banned, and, that message would have gotten out there, and we would have lost the war.
Yeah, it would have been sedition, it would have been treason or something like that.
What can we do about these companies? Admittedly, they're private companies, but I keep hearing more and more about them censoring people and what they call shadow banning them. What can be done about that? Anything?
Well, and first of all, let's just recognize that even though Apple got to be a $1 trillion valuation, Facebook really took a hit. And sometimes one thing you can do is say, maybe I don't want to go to that social media anymore. But it is a difficult situation, Kelly, because on the one hand, we talked about this with Craig Parshall when he did the Milton initiative there at NRB and some others. Just the fact that it is a private company, but it's also kind of a common carrier. Mm-hmm. And so Facebook and Twitter, they have to decide, are we a common carrier? And if that's the case, we're like a public forum and everybody has a chance to express their point of view. Or are we like an opinion page of a newspaper and we can censor that? I think, first of all, they've got to decide that, and then we have to decide what we're going to do, right?
Yeah, like Facebook and YouTube. I mean, YouTube, look what they're doing, the Dennis Prager videos,
yes.
How you ask for them and you don't see the one on Israel and you don't see the one on these others because they're listing them like it's pornography, so it gets blocked from your filtering. The stuff that they're doing, the algorithms of Google and Facebook and what they're doing to keep information from people, information that they want, is really wrong. And I think, the good news is the consumer will eventually get their way in the free market. And this is an abuse of the consumers right now. I think the solution is going to end up being one of two things. Either these groups are going to realize we're in danger of our company being in serious trouble or totally controlled by the government, and therefore we better come up with sort of a Bill of Rights that we're real clear and open about everything we're doing. I think we're either going to end up there or we're going to end up with, as you mentioned, common carrier, kind of really them being treated like a monopoly, because you can't have them controlling all of our information and then engaging in censorship. If they're, and they are, I think I heard, 80% of all digital advertising controlled by Facebook and Google. That's a monopoly. And so I think that either the government is going to eventually come in, or they're going to, before that happens, realize we've got a real problem. We better open everything up, and we better be real open with our consumers about what we're doing.
Yeah. Good point. Just before we run out of time, I did want to get the comment or two when you were on with Shannon Breen. Mm-hmm. And first of all, I've had a lot of people say that was really a great interview. But a couple of times, like I said, I could sense you were a little bit frustrated. And I was, too, was watching it. Like, you find the issue's freedom. This is not anti-LGBT stuff. This is, we're about freedom for everybody. And I think Jeremy's made the case that you represent Muslims, Jews. This isn't just for Christians, and it isn't used as some kind of weapon so that you can be anti-LGBT, but that was kind of how she kept coming back. And again, she was just trying to, I guess, be fair, but how do you respond to what the Daily Beast and some of these have been saying about these?
Well, first, I'd encourage people to watch it for themselves. It's I think it's on First Liberty's website.
It's on First Liberty.
Is it
I
on
think we have ours.
Point of View?
Yeah, it's on yours.
And
yeah,
you can
find it.
Go to Point of View as well.
Mm-hmm.
But was quoting from a Daily Beast article. The reason I hope I didn't show my frustration, but I was like, the first question I was okay. The second question I was like, really? We're going back here again? Because the article was a joke. Yeah. That's why it was. The article went on and on about how everything was going to come to an end as we know it. All this because of the Religious Liberty Task Force created by the DOJ.
Please.
And when you read the article, though, certainly you're going. I was reading it going. Hiram Sasser, our general counsel, was there. Jeremy was there. We were all there. And nothing they were talking about was what happened or said at the event. So the article was like a complete fabrication of, what they hoped might not happen or whatever, but it didn't state it that way. It was like, this is what's going to happen. And there was no citation anywhere in the article to anything. No evidence, nothing. And so it really, the second time I think the words I used was they're detached from reality.
Yeah.
They're talking about an event that they didn't attend, and they're quoting nothing from the event. So it's hard to respond to that except to say it's silly. Let's move on to something that's real. But unfortunately, that's what you get sometimes with the Daily Beast.
No, that's exactly right. They were missing in reality entirely. What we saw sitting in the front row was a cross-section of America sitting there saying how important religious liberty is, how vital the First Amendment and the laws that Congress has passed to be executed by the agencies of the executive branch of government, and how this task force was going to ensure that all those things were consistent. That was the purpose of the event itself. That there is a need for a task force, I would agree with them on that point, is unfortunate. But here we are today, seeing synagogues not able to build in towns where they're welcoming in strip clubs and movie theaters and things like that, and yet finding people for trying to build a house of worship. It may not be necessary in a day and age where we should not have any controversy over whether a student can read his Bible during free reading time at school, and yet here we are working on those cases as well. It should be unnecessary in a time when a coach takes a knee after the game is done for 15 to 30 seconds of silent prayer. Nobody else hears him, and he's fired from his job because of that. We're here in a day and an age where we have gravestones, monuments that have been erected to men and women who have died defending our freedom, and that is somehow an establishment of religion because it happens to appear on public property, and yet here we are. We're defending the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial at the Supreme Court of the United States. That's why this task force is so necessary and so important. And so if people are simply just using it as a dog whistle, the word religious liberty as a dog whistle to promote their side of the progressive agenda, they need to stop, reread the First Amendment, read these cases that we're talking about on a daily basis, and remind themselves how important that promise the Founding Fathers made to us today actually is.
Might want to get the T-shirt. It's football season. Good time to get that. If you want to sign up, there's a place for you to sign a petition and find out a little bit more about some of that. Sign up and get the newsletter and all of those issues. And don't forget those resource pamphlets, because school is starting, and you're going to have some of these controversies. I will predict in the next week or so, Kelly, we're going to be talking about one of those cases where a coach gets together, gives a pep talk to the kids, and somebody says, oh, that was just too religious. And we hear from the Freedom from Religion Foundation or somebody. So we'll be talking about that with you guys. Thank you both for being here for all 3 hours. And I just might mention that next week we got Wayne Grudem, we got Dinesh D'Souza, we got Star Parker, to mention just a few off the top of my head. And so this is going to be, I think, a great week. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Certainly want to thank Andrew and Elisa for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Point of View.
Just over 100 years ago, 2 or 3 cents would buy you what it takes $1 to buy today. What of any real value can you buy for $1? Well, how about this? How about enabling one listener to hear Point of View not just today, but for an entire year? You heard right. $1 makes it possible to reach a person through the radio or through any of our online channels for a year, and pays for all the other resources available through our website. All the interviews with special guests and public officials, all the information, all the training, all the inspiration and transformation for $1. How many dollars will you invest in the future of our nation? How many lives can you change with your investment today? Call right now and reach more people to help change our nation. 1-800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net, because $1 really can go a long, long way. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God.